Sometimes, the most extraordinary miracles happen in the most ordinary moments. On a rain-soaked highway outside Detroit, a struggling mechanic stops to help a stranger with a flat tire. What he doesn't know is that this simple act of kindness will unlock a future he never dared to imagine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This isn't just a story about fixing cars. It's a story about how one storm can wash away everything you thought you knew about your life, and how sometimes the person you help today becomes the answer to prayers you haven't even whispered yet. Stay with us, because what unfolds next will remind you that miracles don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the middle of a thunderstorm, wearing designer clothes and driving a car worth more than most people's houses. Marcus Rivera had always believed that storms brought nothing but trouble. Standing in his cramped garage at 2 in the morning, listening to the rain hammer against the corrugated metal roof like an angry percussion section, he had every reason to maintain that belief. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting erratic shadows across oil-stained concrete and walls lined with tools that had seen better decades. The garage barely deserved the name. Tucked between a defunct laundromat and a corner store that sold day-old bread and expired lottery tickets, Rivera's auto repair was more skeleton than body. The sign out front had been missing the letter R for 6 months, leaving passersby to wonder what exactly a ivers auto epair might be. Marcus had meant to fix it, just like he'd meant to fix 1,000 other things that kept getting pushed to tomorrow. He wiped his hands on a rag that might have been blue once, back when Carter was president. The '98 Honda Civic on the lift. Above him, dripped transmission fluid into a pan that was already 3/4 full. Mrs. Chen's car had been sitting here for 2 weeks because she couldn't afford the $400 for a rebuild. Marcus had already put $150 of his own money into parts, knowing full well he'd never see it back. That was the problem with having a conscience in a business where conscience was a luxury most people couldn't afford. 3 years ago, when he'd first bought this place with money borrowed from his sister and dreams bigger than his bank account, he'd thought he could make it work. He'd thought being honest, charging fair prices, and treating people decently would be enough. 3 years later, he was 3 months behind on rent, living on ramen noodles and black coffee, and watching every customer who could afford to go elsewhere do exactly that. The fancy Valvoline down the street with its computerized diagnostics and spotless waiting room with cable TV had slowly bled away most of his business. What was left were the people like Mrs. Chen, like old Mr. Washington with his 20-year-old pickup, like the single mothers who counted quarters to put gas in their cars. Marcus glanced at the clock on the wall, a promotional piece from a parts supplier that had gone out of business 8 years ago. Nearly 2:30. He should be home trying to catch a few hours of sleep before tomorrow brought another day of barely scraping by. But sleep had become elusive lately, chased away by the weight of bills piling up like autumn leaves and the growing certainty that he was fighting a losing battle. He'd grown up in this neighborhood, back when it had been different. Back when the barbershop next door actually cut hair instead of sitting empty with soap-streaked windows. Back when families had lived here for generations instead of moving away as soon as they could afford to. His father had worked at the Ford plant until the layoffs in '08. His mother cleaned office buildings downtown until her knees gave out. They'd scraped and saved to send him to community college, where he'd studied automotive technology with the fervor of someone who believed that hard work and skill were all you needed to build a life. His instructors had praised his intuitive understanding of engines, his ability to diagnose problems that stumped his classmates, his meticulous attention to detail. None of them had mentioned that being good at fixing cars and being good at running a business were two entirely different skill sets. None of them had warned him about insurance costs that ate half his profits, about suppliers who demanded payment up front when you were small and credit when you were big, about customers who expected miracles on tight budgets and sometimes no budget at all. The rain picked up intensity, drumming against the metal roof like impatient fingers. Marcus walked to the small window that looked out onto the street, wiping away condensation with his sleeve. The streetlight outside flickered sporadically, throwing weak yellow light across the empty road. Even the traffic was lighter these days, as people took the new bypass that avoided this stretch of town entirely. He was about to turn away when headlights cut through the darkness, moving slowly down the street. The car was clearly struggling, lurching slightly as it moved. Marcus squinted through the rain-streaked glass and saw it pull into his lot. The engine dying with a cough that didn't sound promising. For a moment, he considered pretending he wasn't here. It was late, he was tired, and whoever it was probably couldn't pay anyway. But conscience, that expensive luxury he couldn't seem to shake, tugged at him like a persistent child. He grabbed a jacket that had more patches than original fabric and headed for the door. The rain hit him like a cold slap as soon as he stepped outside. Through the downpour, he could see someone struggling to get out of the car, the door apparently stuck. Marcus jogged over, his work boots splashing through puddles that had formed in the cracked asphalt. "Need a hand?" he called out over the sound of the storm. The driver's side door finally gave way, and out stepped someone who clearly didn't belong in this neighborhood, especially not at this hour. She was maybe 35, dressed in a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Her dark hair was pulled back in what had probably been a neat bun before the rain got to it, and she clutched a leather briefcase against her chest like armor. She looked up at him, and even in the dim light from the street lamp, Marcus could see the mixture of frustration and embarrassment in her eyes. "I'm so sorry to bother you this late," she said, having to raise her voice over the storm. "My car just died. I was trying to get home from a client dinner downtown when it started making this terrible noise and then just stopped." Marcus nodded toward the garage. "Let's get out of this rain first, then we'll take a look." She hesitated for a moment, probably weighing her options. A stranger's garage at 2:30 in the morning wasn't exactly the scenario they taught you about in whatever expensive business school she'd obviously attended. But the rain was soaking through her suit, and her car wasn't going anywhere under its own power. "Thank you," she said finally, following him to the garage. Inside, the fluorescent light seemed even harsher after the darkness outside. Marcus grabbed a relatively clean towel from a hook on the wall and handed it to her. She dried her face and hair as best she could, looking around the garage with the kind of careful observation that suggested she was used to assessing situations quickly. "I'm Marcus," he said, suddenly aware of how he must look in his grease-stained coveralls and worn jacket. "Marcus Rivera. This is my place." "Elena," she replied, then seemed to catch herself. "Elena Walsh, and I really appreciate this. I tried calling AAA, but apparently everyone else in the city had the same idea tonight. They said it would be at least 3 hours." Marcus gestured for her to have a seat on an overturned crate that served as his makeshift customer waiting area. It wasn't much, but it was dry and relatively clean. "Let me grab a flashlight and take a look at your car. What kind of noise was it making?" "Sort of a grinding sound, getting worse and worse. And then there was this loud bang right before it died." Elena set down her briefcase and wrapped her arms around herself. Despite the expensive suit, she looked small and vulnerable in the harsh light of the garage. Marcus nodded. "Sounds like it could be the transmission, but let me check." "You doubt. What kind of car?" "It's a BMW 7 Series, the 750i. She said it apologetically, as if she knew how out of place such a car was in this neighborhood. Marcus whistled low. That's a nice ride. Recent model. Last year's. It's a company car, actually. She paused, then added, I know it's probably expensive to fix. I have insurance, and I can pay whatever it costs. There was something in the way she said it, a kind of resigned exhaustion that made Marcus look at her more carefully. The suit was expensive, yes, but it showed signs of a long day. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her shoulders carried the weight of someone who'd been pushing herself too hard for too long. Let's not worry about that yet, Marcus said. First, let's see what we're dealing with. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and a basic toolkit, pulling on a rain poncho that had seen better years. I'll be quick as I can. There's coffee on the counter there if you want some. Fair warning, it's been sitting since this afternoon, so it's probably not great. Elena managed a small smile. After the day I've had, I'm not picky. Outside, the rain had somehow gotten worse. Marcus popped the hood of the BMW and immediately saw the problem. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Transmission fluid was pooled beneath the car, and when he checked the dipstick, it came up dry. He traced the leak to a ruptured transmission line, probably caused by road debris or just the kind of wear that happened when expensive cars met. Real-world driving conditions. It was fixable, but it would require parts he didn't have on hand and several hours of work. Not the kind of thing you did in a storm at 3 in the morning. He made his way back to the garage, shaking water from his poncho. Elena looked up from where she was sitting, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. That bad? Ruptured transmission line, Marcus said, pulling off the poncho. The good news is it's not the transmission itself. The bad news is I don't have the parts to fix it tonight, and even if I did, it's not the kind of job you want to do in this weather. She nodded slowly, processing the information. So I'm stuck here. For tonight, yeah, I could call you a cab, but in this storm. Marcus gestured toward the window, where lightning now added to the symphony of rain and wind. My phone's been dead for an hour, Elena said, holding up an iPhone with a black screen. I forgot to charge it after my last meeting. Marcus looked at her sitting there in her expensive suit in his rundown garage and felt that familiar tug of conscience. Look, there's a motel about 2 miles up the road. It's not the Ritz, but it's clean and safe. I could drive you over there tonight, then work on your car first thing in the morning. Elena stared into her coffee cup for a moment. You'd do that? Drive me to a motel at 3 in the morning? Mom, you're stranded in a storm. That's what people do for each other. She looked up at him then, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that he couldn't quite identify. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. That's not what I'm used to. There was a story there, Marcus realized. Something about the way she held herself, the careful way she chose her words, suggested that simple kindness wasn't a regular feature in her world, but that wasn't his business. His business was fixing cars and helping people when he could. Let me grab my keys, he said. Wait. Eleanor stood up, setting down the coffee cup. I don't want to impose any more than I already have. Maybe I could just stay here tonight? I mean, if that's okay with you. That couch in your office looks comfortable enough. Marcus frowned. Ma'am, that's not really... this isn't exactly please. The word came out more forcefully than she'd probably intended. I've had a really long day, and honestly, the idea of getting back out in that storm just to sit alone in some motel room. She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. I'll pay you for the inconvenience. Of course, Marcus studied her face. There was something desperate there, beneath the professional composure, not just about the car, but about something else entirely. Maybe she was running from something or towards something. Maybe she was just exhausted and overwhelmed and needed a place to catch her breath. "You don't need to pay me anything," he said finally, "and you're welcome to stay. I've got a cot in the back office that's more comfortable than the couch. I sometimes sleep here myself when I'm working late on a project." Relief washed over her features. "Thank you, really. I know this is all very irregular." "Regular went out the window when you broke down at 2:30 in a storm," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Let me show you where everything is." The office was small and cluttered, with a desk covered in invoices and parts catalogues, a filing cabinet that had seen better days, and a narrow window that looked out onto the garage. The cot was military style, basic but sturdy, with a clean blanket folded at the foot. "Bathrooms through that door," Marcus said, pointing to a narrow hallway. "It's not fancy, but it's clean. Towels are in the cabinet. There's a vending machine by the front door if you get hungry." Elena looked around the small space, then back at him. "Where will you sleep?" "I've got a sleeping bag in the garage. Won't be the first time I've bunked down out there." He paused at the doorway. "Lock the door if it makes you feel more comfortable. I'll be working on Mrs. Chen's Honda for another hour or so, but I'll try to keep the noise down." "Mrs. Chen, regular customer, been coming here for 15 years. Her transmission's shot, but she can't afford a rebuild right now." Marcus shrugged. "I'm doing what I can to keep her running until she can save up the money." Elena tilted her head slightly. "That doesn't sound very profitable." "It's not," Marcus admitted, "but Mrs. Chen raised 4 kids working 2 jobs after her husband died. Now she takes care of her grandson while her daughter works nights at the hospital. She needs her car, and you're just helping her, even though she can't pay." Marcus looked at her with mild surprise. "That's what neighbors do for each other." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, studying his face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "That's not what I see in most businesses." "Maybe you've been looking in the wrong places," Marcus said gently. "Anyway, I'll let you get some rest. Morning will come early." He was about to leave when Elena spoke again. "Marcus, thank you. Not just for helping with the car, but for this, all of it. I haven't met many people like you." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Just doing what anyone would do." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Not just anyone. Trust me on that." Back in the garage, Marcus tried to focus on Mrs. Chen's Honda, but his mind kept drifting to the woman in his office. There was something about Eleanor Walsh that didn't quite add up. The expensive car, the business suit, the way she carried herself like someone used to being in charge. But also the vulnerability he'd seen, the relief when he'd offered help, the surprise at simple kindness. He worked methodically, replacing a worn clutch plate and adjusting the linkage. His hands moved automatically through the familiar motions while his thoughts wandered. In the morning, he'd fix her car. She'd pay him and drive back to whatever world she'd come from, and that would be that. Another random encounter in a life full of them, but something told him it wouldn't be quite that simple. Something about the way she'd looked at him when he'd mentioned helping Mrs. Chen, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find, like maybe she was as lost as her car had been out there in the storm. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Marcus glanced toward the office. A thin line of light showed under the door. Elena was still awake, probably staring at the ceiling and wondering how she'd ended up spending the night in a run-down garage on the wrong side of town. Marcus turned back to the Honda, but paused when he heard the sound of the office door opening. Elena appeared in the doorway, having changed out of her business suit into clothes from her briefcase. Jeans and a simple white blouse that made her look younger and more approachable. "Couldn't sleep," she said, padding barefoot across the concrete floor. "Mind if I watch?" Marcus gestured to an overturned bucket near his workstation. "Pull up a seat. Fair warning, it's not exactly exciting." Elena settled onto the makeshift stool, tucking her feet under her. Actually, it is. I've never really seen how cars work. I mean, I know the basics, but watching someone who actually knows what they're doing. You've never been interested in cars? Marcus asked, sliding back under the Honda. I've always been more of a tech person. Computers, software, that kind of thing. Elena paused. Though I suppose cars are becoming more like computers these days. Marcus laughed from beneath the car. Don't remind me. Half the new cars that come in here, I need a computer science degree just to run the diagnostics. Is that hard for you? The way technology is changing the industry. Marcus rolled out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag. It's harder for guys like me, yeah. The small shops. We can't afford the latest diagnostic equipment that costs more than I make in a year. Can't get certified on all the new systems. Meanwhile, the dealerships and chain shops have all the fancy computers and factory training. That must be frustrating. It is what it is, Marcus said, though Eleanor could hear the frustration beneath his casual tone. You adapt or you get left behind. I've been trying to adapt, but sometimes it feels like trying to catch a train that's already left the station. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching him work. You really love this, don't you? Working on cars. Marcus paused, considering the question. I love fixing things. Always have. When I was a kid, I'd take apart anything I could get my hands on. Radios, toasters, my mom's vacuum cleaner. Usually got in trouble for it too, especially when I couldn't put them back together. But you learned. Eventually, my dad wasn't much for mechanical things, but he knew I needed an outlet for all that energy. Started bringing me here to watch old Mr. Ramirez work. Marcus gestured around the garage. This used to be Ramirez Auto. He taught me everything, not just how to fix engines, but how to treat customers, how to run a business. When he retired, he offered to sell me the place. And you couldn't resist. Oh, couldn't resist. Couldn't afford it. Couldn't walk away. Marcus smiled ruefully. Mr. Ramirez carried most of the paper himself. Said he'd rather see the place stay in the family than sell to some corporation that would gut it and turn it into another chain shop. Elena watched him work in silence for a few more minutes. There was something hypnotic about the way he moved, confident and precise, his hands seeming to know exactly what to do without conscious thought. It was like watching an artist in his studio or a musician with his instrument. Can I ask you something? Elena said finally. Shoot. Earlier when you mentioned Mrs. Chen, you're losing money helping her, aren't you? Marcus's hands stilled for a moment. It's not about the money, but you have bills to pay just like everyone else. Marcus set down his wrench and looked at her directly. I've got 3 months of rent past due. My insurance payment bounced last week. I'm living on ramen noodles and whatever's on sale at the dollar store. He paused. So yeah, helping Mrs. Chen is costing me money I don't have. Then why do it? Because what's the alternative? Let an 80-year-old woman who's never missed church on Sunday walk to the grocery store. Let her grandson miss school because grandma can't drive him. Marcus shook his head. I've got problems, but they're not bigger than Mrs. Chen's problems. Eleanor stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. In my world, that would be called bad business. Maybe, Marcus admitted, but it's good people. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling through the gaps in the building. But inside the garage, surrounded by the familiar smell of motor oil and the gentle hum of fluorescent lights, there was a strange sense of peace. Elena pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. You know, I spent 12 years building a company from nothing. Started in my garage, actually, not unlike this place, writing code 18 hours a day, living on pizza and energy drinks, convinced I was going to change the world. What kind of company? Software. Automotive software, actually. Systems for electric vehicles, autonomous driving algorithms, that sort of thing. Elena rested her chin on her knees. We developed some breakthrough technologies, filed dozens of patents, attracted major investors. 5 years ago, we went public, stock shot through the roof. Marcus looked up from the engine with new interest. Sounds like you did change the world. Maybe. But somewhere along the way, I lost track of why I wanted to change it in the first place. Elena's voice grew quiet. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. We just closed a deal that will put our software in every car produced by 3 major manufacturers over the next 5 years. Billions of dollars, millions of vehicles. That doesn't sound like something to be sad about. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. The deal requires laying off 40% of our workforce, people who've been with me from the beginning. People who believed in the vision of making transportation better, cleaner, safer. Now they're just line items in a budget optimization model. Marcus straightened, wiping his hands on the rag again. And you had to sign off on that. I am the CEO. The board made it clear, approve the deal and the layoffs or they'd find someone who would. Elena buried her face in her knees. So I signed. Then I sat through dinner with the executives, listening to them talk about increased market penetration and improved profit margins, while all I could think about was telling Jennifer in accounting that her job is disappearing just before Christmas. The garage was quiet except for the storm outside and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Marcus set down his tools and rolled his stool closer to where Elena sat. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That sounds like an impossible position to be in. I keep telling myself it's for the greater good, that the technology we're developing will ultimately help more people than the jobs we're cutting. But that doesn't make it any easier to look at yourself in the mirror." Marcus studied her face in the harsh fluorescent light. This wasn't the same woman who'd stepped out of the BMW a few hours ago. That woman had been composed, professional, in control. This woman was raw, exhausted, carrying the weight of decisions that kept her awake at night. "You want to know something funny?" Elena continued. "Before tonight, I hadn't set foot in an independent garage in probably 10 years. My car gets serviced at the dealership. Hell, I have an assistant who handles that for me. But sitting here, watching you work, talking about Mrs. Chen and Mr. Ramirez, it reminds me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That there's a difference between building something and just making money." Elena lifted her head, looking around the cluttered garage with new eyes. "You could probably make more money if you turned away customers like Mrs. Chen, if you focused on people who could afford to pay full price for everything." "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But then you wouldn't be who you are, and this place wouldn't be what it is." Marcus felt uncomfortable under the intensity of her gaze. "I'm not sure I follow." Elena stood up, pacing the small space between the workbench and the car lift. "In my world, everything is about efficiency. Maximizing returns, minimizing costs, scaling up, growing market share. We measure success in quarterly earnings and stock prices." She stopped in front of a bulletin board covered with thank you cards, photos of customers with their restored cars, and children's drawings. "But nobody ever tells you about Mrs. Chen. Nobody talks about the guy who keeps a garage open at 2 in the morning to help a stranger. Nobody puts that in the annual report." Marcus looked at the bulletin board, seeing it through her eyes. The thank you note from the teenager whose first car he'd kept running through high school. The photo of old Mr. Washington standing proudly next to his restored pickup. The crayon drawing from Mrs. Chen's grandson showing a stick figure Marcus under the hood of a car. "This is real," Eleanor said softly, touching one of the cards. "This matters in a way that stock options and board meetings never will." It doesn't pay the bills, Marcus pointed out. No, it doesn't, but maybe... Elena trailed off, her mind clearly working through something. Maybe there's a way to do both, to build something that matters and still survive in the world as it exists. Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Instead, he watched Elena pace, her mind clearly churning through possibilities he couldn't begin to imagine. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, the rain settling into a steadier rhythm, the wind losing some of its ferocity. "I should let you get some work done," Elena said finally, as if suddenly remembering where she was. "And I should probably try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated enough. Will you be okay? I mean, with your company, the layoffs." Elena managed a small smile. "I'll figure something out. I always do." She paused at the door to the office. "Marcus, thank you for listening. I haven't talked to anyone about this stuff in, well, longer than I should have." "Anytime," Marcus said, meaning it. "And Elena, maybe those people you're laying off, maybe they're not just line items. Maybe some of them are the Mrs. Chens of your world." Elena stopped in the doorway, her hand on the frame. For a moment, Marcus thought she might say something. Instead, she nodded once and disappeared into the office, closing the door softly behind her. Marcus stood alone in the garage, surrounded by the familiar chaos of his life's work. Through the window, the first faint hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. In a few hours, Elena would be gone, back to her world of corporate boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. Her BMW would be fixed, and she'd drive away, probably never to return. But something had changed in the last few hours, something Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on. It wasn't just that he'd helped someone in need, he did that every day. It was the conversation, the glimpse into a world so different from his own, the recognition that they weren't as different as they might appear on the surface. Both of them were trying to build something. Both of them were fighting to hold on to what mattered in a world that often seemed determined to strip it away. The scale was different, the stakes were different, but the struggle was surprisingly similar. Marcus looked at Mrs. Chen's Honda, now purring quietly on the lift. Tomorrow, he'd call her and let her know it was ready. She'd come by after work, her grandson in tow, and she'd grip his hands with tears in her eyes and try to pay him more than he was asking for. And somehow, that made all the late nights and unpaid bills and corporate competition worth it. Because Mrs. Chen mattered. Because the teenager saving up for his first car mattered. Because Mr. Washington, who drove the same truck his father had bought new in 1978, mattered. They all mattered. And as long as Rivera's auto repair stayed open, they'd have a place where someone understood that. Marcus finished buttoning up the Honda, cleaned his tools, and prepared to catch a few hours of sleep before the real work began. Outside, the storm was finally passing, leaving behind the clean smell of rain-washed air and the promise of a new day. Morning arrived with the gentle persistence of sunlight filtering through the garage's grimy windows. Marcus woke to the sound of his alarm clock, a persistent beeping that had been annoying him into consciousness for the better part of a decade. He rolled off the sleeping bag he'd spread on the floor behind the parts counter, his back protesting. The night spent on concrete. The storm had passed, leaving behind puddles that reflected the pale morning sky and the fresh scent of rain-washed air. Marcus stretched, working out the kinks in his neck, and glanced toward the office. No sound came from behind the closed door. Elena was probably still sleeping, and he didn't blame her. From what she told him about her day, she needed the rest. He made his way to the small coffee maker in the corner, an ancient Mr. Coffee machine that had been Mr. Ramirez's and still worked better than most of the newer appliances in the place. As the coffee began to brew, filling the garage with its familiar aroma, Marcus planned out his day. First, he'd work on Elena's BMW. The transmission line would need to be replaced, which meant a trip to the parts shop across town. Then he'd finish up Mrs. Chen's Honda and call a few other customers about their pending repairs. The office door opened quietly, and Eleanor emerged, looking remarkably put together for someone who'd slept in a garage office. She'd somehow managed to make her jeans and blouse look professional, and her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She carried her briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other. "Good morning," she said, her voice still slightly hoarse, from sleep. "I hope I didn't oversleep. What time is it?" "Just past 7, Marcus said, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. "Coffee? Please." Eleanor accepted the mug gratefully, inhaling the steam. "I managed to get my phone charged, using the outlet in your office. I hope that's okay." "Of course." Marcus leaned against the workbench, studying her face. The vulnerability he'd seen last night was still there, but it was masked again by the professional composure that was clearly second nature to her. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I expected, actually." Elena took a sip of coffee and looked around. The garage in the morning light. It's different in daylight, still cluttered, but there's a kind of order to it, isn't there? Like everything has its place. Marcus followed her gaze, seeing his domain through fresh eyes. She was right. What looked like chaos to an outsider actually had its own logic. Tools where he could reach them quickly, parts organized by frequency. Of use, work areas arranged for maximum efficiency. It was the product of years of refinement, of learning what worked and what didn't. 15 years of trial and error, he admitted. Mr. Ramirez used to say, a disorganized shop was a sign of a disorganized mind. Smart man. Elena walked over to where the BMW sat, its hood already propped open. "So what's the prognosis? Am I looking at major surgery?" Marcus joined her at the car, pointing to the damaged transmission line. "Ruptured here, probably from road debris. Or just wear and tear. Not uncommon on these models, actually. The line itself isn't expensive, but it's labor-intensive to replace. I'll need to get under the car, drain the transmission, disconnect several other components to access it properly." "How long?" "If I can get the part this morning, have you back on the road by this afternoon, early evening at the latest." Elena nodded, then pulled out her phone. "I should probably call my office, let them know I won't be in until later." Marcus started to move away to give her privacy, but Elena held up a hand. "Actually, would you mind if I made the call here? I might need to explain why I'm at a garage in..." She paused, looking around. "I just realized I don't even know what neighborhood this is." "Riverside," Marcus said. "About 15 minutes from downtown, depending on traffic." Elena dialed, and Marcus tried not to listen as she spoke to what was obviously her assistant. Her voice was crisp and professional, explaining that she'd had car trouble and would be delayed. She mentioned nothing about spending the night in a garage, nothing about their conversation the night before. When she hung up, she looked slightly tired again. "My assistant, Kevin. He's already fielding calls about yesterday's dinner. Apparently everyone wants to discuss the implications of the new deal. The layoffs? Among other things." Elena set her phone down on the workbench. "I've got until Monday to present the implementation plan to the board. 72 hours to figure out how to destroy 40% of my workforce with maximum efficiency and minimum legal liability." Marcus watched her face as she spoke. The bitterness in her voice was new, sharper than the resigned sadness of the night before. "You really don't want to do this, do you?" "Want has nothing to do with it." Elena picked up a wrench from the workbench, turning it over in her hands. "This is business. This is survival in a competitive market. This is what shareholders expect. And what do you expect? From yourself, I mean." Elena was quiet for a long moment, still turning the wrench in her hands. I used to think I was building something that mattered, something that would make transportation cleaner, safer, more efficient. I had this vision of cities where traffic moved smoothly, where accidents were rare, where the air was cleaner because most vehicles were electric. That still sounds like something that matters. Maybe. But when did it become about maximizing profit margins instead of maximizing good? When did the people who believed in the vision become expendable assets? Elena set the wrench down carefully. Last night, listening to you talk about Mrs. Chen, about keeping this place running because it matters to the community, I couldn't help but think about what my company used to be. Marcus poured more coffee for both of them, processing her words. What was it like? In the beginning? Elena smiled, and for the first time since the night before, it looked genuine. Chaos, beautiful chaos. I had 6 people working out of my garage. Jenny Martinez was my lead programmer, brilliant mathematician, could make code do things that shouldn't have been possible. David Kim handled hardware integration, building prototypes out of spare parts and sheer determination. Rachel Thompson managed our first client relationships, convincing people to trust technology that barely existed yet. They sound like you're Mrs. Chen. They were, they are. Elena's voice grew soft. Jenny still comes to work at 6 in the morning, even though she makes enough now to retire. David's got 17 patents to his name, all of them breakthroughs that made our success possible. Rachel turned our first client into our biggest advocate, and she's brought in millions in business through sheer force of personality and expertise. Damn, they're on the list. Elena nodded slowly. Not all of them, not yet, but the board is pressuring me to streamline operation, which means cutting anything that doesn't directly contribute to the bottom line. Jenny's research team is working on technology that won't see market implementation for 3 to 5 years. David's hardware lab is considered redundant now that we're licensing our software to manufacturers instead of building our own devices. Marcus leaned against the car, studying Elena's face. So don't do it. It's not that simple, isn't it? You're the CEO. You make the decisions. Elena laughed, but it was hollow. You make it sound like I have complete autonomy. I have a board of directors, shareholders, investors who've put billions into this company. They didn't invest in a charity. They invested in returns. But it's still your company, right? You built it. I own 38% of the stock. The board can override me if they have enough votes. And right now, with the pressure from investors to show improved profitability, they do. Elena rubbed her temples. I have enough personal wealth to buy out some of the smaller shareholders, but that would cost me everything I have, and it still might not give me control. Marcus walked over to his toolbox, pulling out the equipment he'd need to work on the BMW. As he gathered tools, he thought about Elena's situation. It seemed impossibly complex compared to his world, where the biggest decisions involved whether to extend credit to a customer who was late on payments. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Sure. Why did you really stay here last night, instead of going to the motel? Elena was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I've been running boardrooms and managing crises and making impossible decisions for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be human, to have a conversation without calculating every word for its strategic value. She picked up the wrench again, absently cleaning imaginary dirt from its surface. And because when you talked about Mrs. Chen, when you explained why you help her, even though it costs you money you don't have, I remembered something. I remembered why I started coding in the first place. Why did you? Because my father was a taxi driver. Worked 16-hour days in Boston, dealing with traffic, rude passengers, a car that broke down constantly. He'd come home exhausted, smelling like cigarettes and stress, too tired to do anything but fall asleep in front of the TV. Elena's voice grew soft with memory. I thought if I could make cars smarter, if I could solve traffic problems, maybe people like my father wouldn't have to work so hard just to survive. Marcus stopped gathering tools and looked at her directly. What happened to him? Heart attack at 56, right there in his cab, stuck in traffic on the Mass Pike. Elena's hands stilled on the wrench. He never got to see any of what I built, never knew that his daughter's software would eventually be in millions of vehicles, but he would have understood Mrs. Chen. He would have understood why you help people, even when it costs you. The garage fell silent, except for the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. Marcus set down his tools and pulled over a stool, sitting across from Elena. You know what I think? What? I think you're still that person, the one who wanted to help people like her father. You've just gotten so caught up in the business side that you've forgotten how to access that part of yourself. Elena looked up from the wrench, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. I still have to present the layoff plan on Monday. I still have to look Jenny and David and Rachel in the eye and tell them that their years of loyalty and innovation don't matter as much as next quarter's earnings. Marcus stood up, walking over to where Mrs. Chen's Honda sat, now complete and running smoothly. He ran his hand along its faded paint, thinking, you know what Mrs. Chen said to me last month when she brought her car in? What? She said, Marcus, I know you're losing money helping me. My neighbor told me I should take it to one of those quick lube places, get it fixed cheap. But you know what? Those places don't know my car. They don't know that it has a quirk with the clutch, or that the radio only works if you hit it in just the right spot, or that the passenger door sticks unless you lift the handle exactly right. Marcus turned back to Eleanor. She said, you know my car because you care about my car. And you care about my car because you care about me. That's worth more than saving a few dollars. I'm not sure I see your point. My point is that Mrs. Chen doesn't come here just because I fix her car cheaply. She comes here because I remember that she needs it to pick up her grandson from school. Because I know that her late husband's reading glasses are still in the glove compartment and she likes to leave them there. Because when she's here, she's not just a customer, she's Mrs. Chen. Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And you think that's what I've lost? The ability to see people as people instead of assets. I think you still see them. That's why this is so hard for you. But I also think you're so focused on the forest that you've forgotten how to look at individual trees. Elena stood up, pacing the small space again. But even if I wanted to find another way, even if I could convince the board to give me more time, I don't know what the alternative is. The deal is signed. The investors expect results. The market expects growth. Marcus scratched his head, thinking, in my world, when I can't afford a new part, I figure out how to rebuild the old one. When a customer can't pay full price, I find a way to work with them. Maybe there's not just one solution to your problem. What do you mean? I mean, maybe the choice isn't just lay off 40% of your workforce or lose the deal. Maybe there's a third option you haven't considered. Elena stopped pacing, such as, I don't know. I fix cars, remember? But it seems to me like you've got a bunch of smart people who care about what you're building. Maybe, instead of cutting them loose, you figure out how to use them differently. That's very philosophical, but it doesn't address the financial realities. Marcus shrugged. Mrs. Chen couldn't afford a transmission rebuild, so instead of rebuilding it, I'm maintaining what's there, and we're planning for her to save up for a replacement over the next year. Different approach, same end result, just spread out over time. Elena stared at him. You're suggesting I negotiate different terms with the board. Find a way to restructure instead of just cutting. I'm suggesting you remember that you're Elena Walsh, the woman who turned 6 people in a garage into $1 billion company. If anyone can find a creative solution, it's probably you. Elena looked around the garage again, her eyes taking in the details. The thank you cards on the bulletin board, the photos of happy customers, the organized chaos that somehow worked perfectly for what it needed to accomplish. You know what's funny? Last night I was thinking about how different our worlds are, but maybe they're more similar than I thought. How so? You're running a business that prioritizes relationships over profit margins. You're finding creative solutions to keep people's cars running even when they can't pay full price. You're building something that matters to your community, even though it means you're struggling financially. And maybe that's exactly what I used to do, before the investors and the board meetings and the pressure to scale. Maybe the problem isn't that I need to choose between being profitable and being human. Maybe the problem is that I let other people convince me those things were mutually exclusive. Marcus nodded slowly. Maybe, though I should point out that my approach has left me 3 months behind on rent. Elena smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her. Yes, but it's also earned you the kind of loyalty that money can't buy. Mrs. Chen could get her car fixed cheaper elsewhere, but she doesn't. She comes here because she trusts you. Trust doesn't pay bills, no, but it does something else. It creates value that goes beyond immediate financial return. It builds something sustainable. Elena pulled out her phone, scrolling through. Emails. You know what I'm going to do? What? I'm going to call an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. And instead of presenting a layoff plan, I'm going to present a restructuring proposal, something that keeps our people and leverages their skills in new ways. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for her. That's a big risk, the biggest. If the board doesn't like it, they could vote me out entirely. I could lose everything. Elena met his eyes. But maybe that's better than losing who I am. Marcus grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. Well, while you're planning your corporate revolution, I'm going to go get the part for your car. Parts store opens in 20 minutes, and I want to have you back on the road as soon as possible so you can save your company. Marcus? Eleanor called as he reached the door. Thank you for letting me stay, for listening, for reminding me who I used to be. Just returning the favor, Marcus said. You reminded me that not everyone in the corporate world is a soulless robot focused only on profit. Some people still remember why they started doing what they do. As Marcus drove across town to the parts store, he found himself thinking about Elena's situation. It was easy for him to give advice about staying true to your values when the worst consequence was living on ramen noodles and sleeping in your garage. Elena was talking about risking billions of dollars and potentially losing control of the company she'd built from nothing. But there was something about the way her face had changed when she talked about her father, about the original vision for her company, that reminded Marcus why he'd fallen in love with fixing cars in the first place. It wasn't just about the mechanical puzzles or the satisfaction of making something work again. It was about helping people, about being part of a community, about building something that mattered beyond the immediate transaction. The parts store was busy for a Thursday morning, filled with shop owners and DIY enthusiasts hunting for the components they needed. Marcus found the transmission line he needed and chatted briefly with Jimmy, the parts manager who'd been selling him supplies for over a decade. How's business? Jimmy asked as he rang up the purchase. Same as always, hanging on by a thread, but hanging on. Marcus handed over his credit card, hoping it wouldn't get declined. It went through, much to his relief. You ever think about selling, retiring? I heard the Valvoline down the street offered to buy out old Murphy's place. Marcus shook his head. This is what I do, Jimmy. Can't imagine doing anything else. Even if you could make more money somewhere else? Marcus thought about Elena, about her struggle to balance profitability with purpose. You know what I've learned? Money's important, but it's not everything. You've got to be able to look at yourself in the mirror, Jimmy laughed, spoken like a man who's never been truly broke. I've been broke plenty of times, still am technically, but I've never been so broke that I forgot why I got into this business in the first place. Back at the garage, Marcus found Elena on the phone, pacing the small office while speaking in rapid, intense bursts. Through the partially open door, he could hear fragments of conversation about financial projections, market analysis, and something called strategic pivoting. He left her to her call and got to work on the BMW. Getting to the damaged transmission line required removing several other components first, a delicate process that couldn't be rushed. As he worked, he could hear Eleanor's voice rising and falling in the office, sometimes heated, sometimes passionate, always intelligent. By the time he had the old line out and the new one ready to install, Eleanor had finished her call and emerged from the office looking both excited and terrified. "How's the revolution going?" Marcus asked, wiping grease from his hands. "Complicated. I've got 3 board members who are interested in hearing alternatives, 2 who are completely opposed to any deviation from the original plan, and 1 who's on a yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean and can't be reached until tomorrow." "Sounds like you've got a chance." "Maybe. I spent the last hour on calls with Jenny, David, and Rachel, told them what was happening, asked them to help me develop a proposal that keeps everyone employed while still satisfying the financial requirements of the deal." Marcus looked up from under the BMW. And they're already working on it. Jenny thinks she can accelerate the timeline on her research by bringing in some of the manufacturing team to help with practical applications. David wants to create a consulting division that licenses our expertise to other companies while they transition to our technology. Rachel has ideas about expanding our client services in ways that could generate new revenue streams. Sounds like they're as invested in finding a solution as you are. They are. That's what I forgot. These aren't just employees, they're partners. They've been with me since the beginning because they believe in what we're building, not just because of the paycheck. Marcus slid out from under the car, transmission fluid smudged across his coveralls. Kinda like Mrs. Chen. Exactly like Mrs. Chen. And you know what the crazy part is? While I was on the phone with them, I realized something. The board keeps talking about maximizing shareholder value, but they're thinking short term. What if we could show them that keeping our people, leveraging their innovation, could create more long-term value than cutting 40% of our workforce? That's a pretty big what if. Elena grinned, and Marcus saw a hint of the entrepreneur who'd built a company from nothing. "I didn't get where I am by playing it safe. Besides, if it fails, at least I'll fail trying to do something I believe in rather than succeeding at something that makes me sick." Marcus began the process of connecting the new transmission line, a careful procedure that required steady hands and complete attention. You know, I'm not an expert on corporate strategy, but it seems to me like you've spent so much time thinking about what the board wants and what the investors want that you forgot to consider what you want. I want to build technology that makes people's lives better. I want to work with people I respect and trust. I want to go to bed at night knowing that what I did that day mattered. Elena paused, watching Marcus work. "I also want to make enough money to keep the lights on and pay people well, but that used to be a means to an end, not the end itself. And now? Now I think I let the means become the end. The company became about growth for growth's sake, profit for profit's sake, instead of growth and profit in service of something larger." Marcus torqued the fittings to the proper specifications, then began the process of refilling the transmission fluid. "You think the board will see it that way?" "Some of them might. Harrison Webb, who's been with us since our first round of funding, he remembers what the original vision was. Sarah Chen, no relation to your Mrs. Chen, by the way. She's always been more interested in social impact than pure profit. If I can get them on board, and if our proposal is solid enough, we might have a chance. And if not, Elena was quiet for a moment, then I'll know I tried, and maybe that's worth more than succeeding at something I hate. Marcus finished with the transmission, checked all his connections, and lowered the car from the lift. Let's see if this works. He climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The BMW started immediately, the engine purring smoothly. Success? Elena asked. Looks like it. Let me take it for a quick test drive to make sure everything's working properly. Marcus pulled the car out of the garage, with Elena following on foot. He drove around the block, testing the transmission through all its gears, checking for leaks, listening for any unusual sounds. When he returned, Elena was standing in the doorway of the garage, looking thoughtful. It sounds perfect, she said, as he got out of the car. Should be good to go. I topped off all the fluids, checked the belts, even washed some of the road salt off. Marcus handed her the keys. That'll be $450 for the part and labor. Elena pulled out her phone and opened what looked like a banking app. I can transfer the money directly to your account if you'd prefer. No need to wait for a check to clear. That would be great, actually. Cash flow and all that. Marcus gave her his account information, watching as she transferred not $450, but $1,000. You overpaid, he said, checking his phone, to confirm the transfer. No, I didn't. The extra is for letting me stay, for the coffee, for the conversation, for reminding me why I started my company in the first place. Elena smiled. Consider it a consultation fee. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. You don't need to. I want to. Besides, from what you've told me about Mrs. Chen and your other customers, you could probably use it. Elena gathered her belongings from the office, straightening her clothes and checking her appearance in the small mirror mounted on the wall. When she emerged, she looked every inch the successful CEO again, but there was something different about the way she carried herself, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere professional competence. I should go, she said. I've got a lot of work to do before Monday, and my team is probably wondering what happened to me. Good luck with the board meeting. I hope they listen to what you have to say. So do I. Elena paused at the passenger door of her car, then walked back to where Marcus stood. Can I ask you one more favor? Sure. If I told you that I was going to try to find a way to help small businesses like yours, independent shops that are struggling to compete with the big chains, would you be interested in knowing more about it? Marcus frowned. What do you mean? I mean that part of our restructuring proposal involves creating a program to support independent automotive businesses, providing diagnostic equipment at cost, offering training on new technologies, maybe even creating a network where small shops can share resources and refer customers to each other. That sounds too good to be true. Maybe it is, but maybe it's exactly what the industry needs, a way for technology to lift everyone up instead of just the big players. Elena smiled. I'm not making any promises, but if we can make this work, would you be interested in being part of it? Marcus looked around his garage, thinking about all the nights he'd stayed up worrying about rent, about the customers he'd had to turn away because he didn't have the right equipment, about the constant struggle to keep up with technological changes he couldn't afford to implement. Yeah, he said finally, I'd be interested in hearing more about that. Elena shook his hand, her grip firm and warm. Then I'll be in touch. Either way, win or lose, I'll let you know how things turn out. Drive safe, Marcus said as she got into the BMW. And Elena, don't let them turn you into someone you're not. She started the car and rolled down the window. I won't. And Marcus, thank you for reminding me who I am. Marcus watched the BMW disappear around the corner, then stood for a moment in the morning sunlight outside his garage. The storm had washed the air clean, and despite everything, the overdue rent, the struggling business, the constant uncertainty, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the desperate hope that comes from buying lottery, tickets, or making wishes on stars, but the solid, practical hope that comes from seeing someone choose to do what's right, even when it's hard. Elena Walsh had walked into his garage as a stranded stranger, but she was leaving as something more. An ally, maybe. A reminder that success and integrity didn't have to be mutually exclusive. Marcus walked back into the garage and over to the bulletin board where all the thank you cards and photos were pinned. He looked at them with new eyes, seeing not just reminders of past work, but evidence of something Eleanor had helped him remember. This mattered. What he did here, the way he treated people, the relationships he built, it all mattered in ways that went beyond the bottom line. And maybe, just maybe, there were other people out there who understood that. People who were trying to build something meaningful in a world that often seemed to value only profit and efficiency. Marcus picked up his phone and scrolled to Mrs. Chen's number. Her car was ready, and he knew she'd be relieved to get it back. But more than that, he wanted to hear her voice, to be reminded of why he did this work in the first place. "Mrs. Chen, it's Marcus. Your car's ready when you are. And Mrs. Chen, take your time getting here. I'm not going anywhere." As he hung up the phone, Marcus realized that Eleanor had given him more than just business for the morning. She'd reminded him that every person who walked through his doors was fighting their own battles, carrying their own dreams, trying to build something meaningful in their own way. And maybe that's what really mattered. Not the size of what you built, but the care you put into building it. Not the profit you made, but the people you helped along the way. Marcus looked around his garage one more time, seeing it fresh. It was still cluttered, still struggling, still held together with hope and stubbornness, but it was also home to something important, something worth fighting for, something worth believing in. 3 weeks had passed since the storm. Marcus was in the garage early as usual, working on a vintage Camaro that belonged to a local high school teacher. The morning sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. He'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm, his hands moving automatically through the familiar motions of replacing brake pads, while his mind wandered. The garage felt different lately. Not in any way he could easily explain, but something had shifted since Elena's visit. Maybe it was the extra money she'd paid him, which had helped him catch up on the most pressing bills. Maybe it was the way their conversation had reminded him why he'd gotten into this business in the first place. Or maybe it was simply the lingering hope that somewhere out there, someone was fighting to build something better. Marcus had heard nothing from Elena since that morning. He hadn't really expected to. People like her, with their billion-dollar companies and corporate boardrooms, lived in a different universe than mechanics in struggling neighborhood garages. Still, he found himself occasionally wondering how her board meeting had gone, whether she'd found a way to save her employees, whether she'd managed to hold on to who she was in the face of so much pressure. The rumble of an expensive engine outside brought Marcus back to the present. Through the open bay door, he saw a sleek black Tesla pull into the lot. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Electric vehicles rarely needed the kind of work he specialized in, and this one looked brand new. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Elena Walsh. She looked different than she had 3 weeks ago. Still professional, still polished, but there was something lighter about her demeanor. The weight she'd been carrying seemed diminished, replaced by an energy that reminded Marcus of the entrepreneur she'd described from her early days. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, walking into the garage with a smile that reached her eyes. "Elena." Marcus set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a rag. "This is a surprise. What brings you back to my little corner of the world?" "A promise," she said simply. "I told you I'd let you know how things turned out, win or lose." Marcus gestured to the same overturned crates they'd sat on during the storm. "I take it you survived the board meeting?" Elena's smile broadened. "More than survived. We revolutionized." She settled onto the makeshift seat with an ease that suggested she'd become comfortable in his world. "Remember that alternative proposal I mentioned? The one where we keep our people and find creative ways to restructure instead of just cutting?" "How'd it go?" "It was the hardest thing I've ever done professionally. I walked into that boardroom, knowing I might walk out unemployed. But you know what? The proposal we put together with Jenny, David, Rachel, and the rest of the team was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant." Marcus leaned against his workbench, intrigued. "Tell me about it." Elena's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm Marcus recognized from people talking about work they truly loved. "Instead of laying people off, we restructured into 3 divisions. Jenny's research team became the Innovation Lab, focused on breakthrough technologies with longer development cycles. David's hardware group became TechBridge Solutions, a consulting division that helps traditional manufacturers integrate our software into their systems. And Rachel's expanding our client services into something we're calling AutoCare Connect. And the board bought it. Not immediately. Harrison Webb loved it from the start, saw the long-term potential. Sarah Chen was skeptical about the financial projections, but came around when we showed her the social impact metrics. The others took some convincing. Elena paused, her expression growing more serious. John Morrison, our biggest investor, fought it hard, called it bleeding heart nonsense and threatened to pull funding if we didn't stick to the original plan. Marcus frowned. What happened? "I told him that if he couldn't see the value in keeping our most talented people, maybe he didn't understand our business as well as he thought he did. I offered to buy out his stake personally if he wanted to exit." "That must have been expensive," Elena laughed. "Terrifying is more like it." "But you know what Morrison did? He backed down. Turns out he was testing me, seeing if I still had the backbone that built the company in the first place. He said he'd been worried that growth had made me too conservative, too willing to follow conventional wisdom instead of blazing new trails. So everyone kept their jobs. Not only that, we're hiring. The TechBridge division has already landed 3 major contracts. The Innovation Lab has made breakthroughs that could revolutionize electric vehicle efficiency. And AutoCare Connect has a waiting list of clients wanting our support services." Marcus felt a genuine surge of happiness for her. "That's incredible, Elena. You saved your company and your people." "And we saved our company. Jenny, David, Rachel, and dozens of others made it happen. I just remembered how to listen to them." Elena looked around the garage, taking in the familiar organized chaos. "But that's not the only reason I'm here." "Oh." Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, setting it on the workbench between them. "Remember when I asked if you'd be interested in hearing about a program to help independent shops like yours?" Marcus nodded, suddenly wary. He'd heard promises before from people who claimed they wanted to help small businesses. Usually, it involved contracts that looked good on paper, but favored the larger company in practice. "AutoCare Connect isn't just about servicing our existing clients," Elena continued. "One of our biggest initiatives is what we're calling the Independent Partner Network. We want to work with shops like yours, providing technology, training, and resources that level the playing field with the big chains." She opened the folder, revealing documents that looked official and detailed. "We're not talking about buyouts or franchising. We're talking about partnerships. Real partnerships." Marcus picked up the first page, scanning the contents. It outlined a program that seemed almost too good to be true. Access to professional-grade diagnostic equipment through a lease program that cost less per month than most shops paid for. Basic tools, training programs on electric vehicle maintenance and advanced automotive technology. a referral network that connected independent shops with customers seeking personalized service. "This looks pretty comprehensive," Marcus said carefully. "What's the catch?" Elena smiled, direct as always. "I appreciate that about you, Marcus. The catch is that we're looking for partners who share our values, shops that prioritize customer, relationships over pure profit, places that serve their communities, not just their bottom lines." "And what makes you think this place qualifies?" "Because 3 weeks ago, you helped a stranger at 2 in the morning without asking for anything. In return, because you keep Mrs. Chen's car running even when she can't afford major repairs. Because when I asked about your business model, you talked about people, not profit margins." Marcus set down the papers and looked at Elena seriously. "Why me? You could partner with any number of shops, bigger shops, more profitable shops, shops in better neighborhoods." Elena was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Do you remember what you told me about Mrs. Chen? About how she doesn't come here just because you fix her car cheaply, but because you remember her, because you care about her?" "I remember." That's what we want to build, a network of shops where people aren't just customers, they're neighbors, where technology serves relationships instead of replacing them. Elena leaned forward, her voice growing more passionate. "The big chains are efficient, Marcus. They're fast and they're cheap, but they're also impersonal. They fix cars, not relationships. They serve customers, not communities." Marcus thought about his conversation with Elena during the storm, about her father, the taxi driver, about the vision that had started her company. "And you think there's a market for the personal approach?" "I think there's a hunger for it. People are tired of being treated like transaction numbers. They want to deal with someone who knows their name, who remembers their car's quirks, who understands that sometimes a repair is about more than just fixing what's broken." She gestured around the garage, taking in the bulletin board with its thank you cards and photos, the carefully organized tools, the evidence of years of careful, caring work. "You've built something here that the big chains can't replicate with all their efficiency and corporate training. You've built trust, you've built community, and that has value." Marcus walked over to the bulletin board, studying the collection of memories and relationships represented there. Mrs. Chen's grandson's crayon drawing of a car, a photo of himself with the teenage girl whose first car he'd kept running through high school, taken at her graduation, a thank you note from the veteran whose truck he'd restored as a surprise while the man was in the hospital. "What exactly are you offering?" he asked. Elena joined him at the bulletin board, her voice softer now. "A chance to do more of this. The diagnostic equipment means you can service newer vehicles, electric cars, hybrids. The training programs give you the skills to compete with dealerships on technological complexity. The referral network connects you with customers who specifically want the kind of personal service you provide. And in return, you stay independent. You run your shop your way. You treat your customers the way you always have. The only thing that changes is you have better tools and more opportunities to help people." Marcus turned back to the folder, reading through the details more carefully. The financial terms were surprisingly favorable. The training curriculum looked comprehensive but practical. The technology offerings included equipment he'd been dreaming of for years, but could never afford. "This seems almost too generous," he said. "What's really in it for you?" Elena smiled. "Honestly, we need shops like yours. Our software is becoming standard in millions of vehicles, but those vehicles still need maintenance, still need repairs, still need people who understand them on a human level. We could partner exclusively with big chains, sure, but then we're just another corporate entity enabling other corporate entities." She paused, looking thoughtful. "That night, during the storm, you reminded me that business isn't just about profit, it's about purpose. Our purpose is making transportation better for everyone, not just for people who can afford premium services. That means supporting shops that serve everyone, not just the wealthy. Marcus set the folder down and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood he'd been part of for so many years. The empty lot where the old barber shop used to be. The corner store struggling to compete with big box retailers. The community that had been slowly fragmenting as small businesses closed and people moved away. "You know what's funny?" he said finally. "I spent years thinking that technology was the enemy, that companies like yours were putting people like me out of business. But maybe the problem wasn't technology itself. Maybe it was how technology was being used." "How do you mean?" Marcus turned back to her. Technology could have been helping small shops compete. Instead, it was being hoarded by the big players, used to create advantages they could leverage against independents. Your approach? It uses technology to lift everyone up instead of just the already powerful. Elena nodded. "That's exactly what we're trying to do, but it only works if we have partners who understand that technology is a tool, not a replacement for human judgment and care." Marcus walked back to the workbench, picking up the folder again. As he read through the program details, he found himself getting excited despite his natural caution. The diagnostic equipment alone could triple his ability to service modern vehicles. The training programs would give him skills he'd been trying to acquire for years. And the referral network. "This network," he said, pointing to a section of the proposal. "It connects shops with each other, not just with customers." "That's right. Let's say a customer comes to you with a problem you're not equipped to handle. Instead of sending them to a dealership or a chain shop, you could refer them to another independent in the network who specializes in that type of repair. Everyone benefits. The customer gets personal service. Both shops build their relationships, and the money stays within the independent community." Marcus felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine optimism about the future of his business. "And you're starting this program from scratch?" "We're piloting it with 25 shops across the country, diverse locations, different specialties, but all with the same basic philosophy of putting relationships first." Elena paused. "Rivera's Auto Repair was the first shop I thought of when we were designing the program. Because of one conversation during a storm. Because of who you are, Marcus. Because of what this place represents. Because when I was trying to figure out how to build a program that preserved the human element in an increasingly automated industry, I thought about you and Mrs. Chen and asked myself, what would make this better for them?" Marcus looked around his garage one more time, seeing it both as it was and as it could be. The same caring relationships, the same community focus, but with the tools and resources to serve people better, to compete more effectively, to build something sustainable. "There's just one thing I want to understand," he said finally. "Why? Now, why this storm specifically? You could have driven past that night. You could have called DAA and waited in your car. What made you stop?" Elena considered the question seriously. "I'd been driving around for an hour before I broke down, trying to work up the courage to go home and face what I knew I had to do. I was scared, Marcus. Scared that I'd lost sight of what mattered. Scared that I'd become someone I didn't recognize." She gestured around the garage. "Finding this place, talking to you, remembering why I started my company in the first place. It changed everything, not just my business decisions, but my understanding of what success actually means. And now I get to wake up every day knowing that what I'm building makes life better for people like your Mrs. Chen, like your teenage customer, like the veteran with the restored truck. That's worth more than any profit margin." Marcus extended his hand. "Let's do it." Elena shook it, her smile lighting up the entire garage. Welcome to the Independent Partner Network. Over the next hour, they worked through the practical details of implementation. The diagnostic equipment would be delivered and installed within the week. Marcus would attend his first training session the following month, focusing on electric vehicle maintenance and advanced computer diagnostics. The network portal would be set up that afternoon, connecting him with partner shops and potential customers throughout the region. As they talked, Marcus found himself thinking about possibilities he hadn't considered in years, expanding his services to include hybrid and electric vehicles, collaborating with other shops to handle complex repairs, building a customer base that extended beyond his immediate neighborhood without losing the personal touch that made Rivera's auto repair special. You know, Elena said as they finished the paperwork, there's something else I wanted to discuss. Something not in the formal program materials. Marcus looked up from signing the last document. What's that? I've been thinking about sustainable transportation beyond just electric vehicles, about community-based solutions that reduce the need for individual car ownership while still preserving mobility and independence. Elena paused. I think there might be opportunities for shops like yours to be part of that future. How so? Well, community car-sharing programs, electric bike maintenance and charging stations, even small-scale public transit initiatives. All of these need local partners who understand both the technology and the community. Marcus set down his pen, intrigued. You're talking about changing how transportation works at a fundamental level. I'm talking about evolution, about finding ways for communities to have access to reliable, sustainable transportation without everyone needing to own a personal vehicle. But it only works if the technology is supported by people who care about the community it serves. And you think independent shops could be part of that infrastructure? Elena smiled. I think independent shops like yours could be the foundation of that infrastructure. You already understand your community's needs better than any corporate planner ever could. You already have the trust that makes these kinds of programs work. Marcus looked around his garage, imagining it as more than just a repair shop, as a hub for sustainable transportation options, as a community center where people could access not just car repairs, but a whole range of mobility solutions. It was ambitious, maybe even crazy, but it was also inspiring. One step at a time, he said finally. Let's see how this partnership works out first. One step at a time, Elena agreed. But Marcus, don't be surprised if this step leads to bigger things than either of us can imagine right now. As Elena prepared to leave, gathering her papers and preparing to return to her corporate world, Marcus felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced in years. The garage was still the same cluttered, oil-stained space it had always been. But now it was connected to something larger, part of a network that valued the same things he'd always valued, supported by resources that would let him serve his community better than ever before. Elena, he called as she reached her car, thank you, not just for the program, but for remembering, for choosing to build something that matters. She paused with her hand on the car door. Thank you for reminding me that it was possible. That night during the storm, I thought I was broken down, but really I was just lost. You helped me find my way back. As the Tesla pulled out of the lot, Marcus stood in the doorway of his garage, watching it disappear around the corner. The morning was warming up, and soon his first customer of the day would arrive. Mrs. Chen would probably stop by to pick up some small part she needed. The high school teacher would want to know about the Camaro's progress. But now, there would be more. New customers who had heard about Rivera's auto repair through the network. People with electric vehicles and hybrids who wanted the personal service only an independent shop could provide. training sessions that would expand his knowledge and capabilities, collaborations with other shops that shared his values. Marcus walked back into the garage, looking at the bulletin board with its collection of thank you cards and photos. Tomorrow, he'd probably add Elena's partnership agreement to the collection, not because it represented money or business growth, but because it represented something more important. It represented proof that caring about people, treating customers like neighbors, building relationships instead of just fixing cars, all of that had value. Not just sentimental value, but real, practical, sustainable value in the modern economy. Marcus picked up his wrench and returned to the Camaro, but his mind was already racing ahead to the possibilities Eleanor had outlined. The future looked different now. Not easier necessarily, but definitely brighter. For the first time in years, Marcus Rivera allowed himself to believe that small businesses like his weren't dinosaurs waiting to go extinct. They were seeds waiting to grow into something new, something better, something that combined the best of technological innovation with the irreplaceable value of human connection. The storm that had brought Elena to his garage 3 weeks ago had passed. But the changes it had set in motion were just beginning. And Marcus couldn't wait to see where they would lead. 6 months later, the transformation of Rivera's auto repair was complete, yet somehow still beginning. Marcus stood outside his garage on a crisp autumn morning, watching as the installation crew finished mounting the last piece of equipment, a state-of-the-art electric vehicle charging station that gleamed like a beacon of the future against the weathered brick walls of his building. The garage itself had evolved organically. The same tools hung in their familiar places, the same oil stains marked the concrete floor. But now they were joined by diagnostic equipment that could read the electronic systems of any vehicle manufactured. In the last decade, the bulletin board had doubled in size, accommodating not just the original thank you cards from longtime customers, but new photos and messages from clients who had found Rivera's through the independent partner network. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Saw the news about your community program. Proud to call you a partner. Coffee soon?" He smiled, pocketing the device as Mrs. Chen's familiar Honda turned into the lot. She emerged from the car with her usual careful precision, her grandson Michael trailing behind her with a backpack slung over his shoulder. At 16, Michael had grown tall and serious, inheriting his grandmother's careful attention to detail, but adding the quick curiosity of youth. He'd become a regular fixture at the garage, spending afternoons learning about engines and electronics, with the intensity of someone who'd found his calling. "Good morning, Marcus," Mrs. Chen said, her smile brightening the crisp morning air. "Michael has something to tell you." The teenager stepped forward, his excitement barely contained, despite his attempt at mature composure. "I got accepted to the Automotive Technology program at Metro Community College, full scholarship." Marcus felt a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. "Michael, that's fantastic. Your grandmother must be so proud." Mrs. Chen's eyes glistened as she nodded. "He's been working so hard, all those afternoons here, learning from you, fixing that old motorcycle you helped him find." The scholarship committee was very impressed with his practical experience. Marcus clapped Michael on the shoulder. "What's your focus going to be?" "Electric vehicle systems and sustainable transportation," Michael replied without hesitation. "I want to understand how all this new technology works, how to integrate it with traditional mechanical systems. Maybe someday I can help run a shop like this, but even better equipped to serve the community." The words hit Marcus unexpectedly. Here was a young man who could have his pick of career paths, who could easily be seduced by the promise of corporate salaries and suburban comfort, but who was choosing to commit to community-based work. It felt like validation of everything he'd built here, everything he'd tried to represent. Mrs. Chen reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. The scholarship includes funding for tools and equipment, but we wanted to do something special. She handed the envelope to Marcus, a small thank you for all the years of keeping our family moving. Inside was a check for $5,000. Marcus started to protest, but Mrs. Chen held up a weathered hand. "You helped us when we couldn't pay. Now we help you when we can afford to. This is what neighbors do." Before Marcus could respond, another vehicle pulled into the lot, a sleek grey Volvo with municipal license plates. The driver was a woman in her 40s, wearing the kind of practical blazer that suggested government work or non-profit management. She approached with the confident stride of someone used to getting things done. "Mr. Rivera, I'm Diana Torres, Sustainability Coordinator for the city. I was hoping we could talk." Marcus gestured toward the small office area he'd expanded to accommodate partner network meetings. "Of course. Mrs. Chen, would you and Michael like to come in? I was going to show him the new diagnostic setup anyway." Inside, Diana Torres explained her mission with the kind of passionate efficiency Marcus had learned to associate with people who genuinely cared about their work. The city was launching a pilot program for sustainable neighborhood transportation, and they needed local partners to help implement it. "We're not talking about replacing cars entirely," she clarified, pulling out a tablet to show detailed plans. "We're talking about creating options, community car share programs for residents who only occasionally need a vehicle, electric bike, sharing with maintenance stations at local businesses, even some small-scale electric shuttle routes connecting neighborhoods to transit hubs." She tapped the screen, bringing up a map of the surrounding area. "Your shop is perfectly positioned to be a hub for this kind of program. You have the technical expertise now, thanks to your partnership with Elena Walsh's company. You have community trust, which is absolutely essential, and you understand the specific needs of this neighborhood better than any central planning office ever could." Marcus studied the plans, his mind racing through possibilities and challenges. "What exactly would be required from my end?" "Maintenance and repair services for the electric bikes and community vehicles, hosting a bike share station on your property, serving as a local information point where residents can learn about the program and sign up for services." Diana's eyes lit up with excitement. "And honestly, we'd love your input on how to design the program so it actually serves people's needs instead of just looking good on paper." Michael leaned forward from where he'd been quietly listening. "This is exactly what Professor Martinez was talking about in our sustainability workshop. Local businesses becoming part of the transportation ecosystem instead of just being destinations." Diana turned to the teenager with interest. "You're studying transportation systems?" "Starting next semester. I've been learning here at Mr. Rivera's shop for 2 years." Michael glanced at Marcus with something approaching reverence. "He taught me that fixing cars isn't just about the mechanical parts. It's about understanding how transportation fits into people's lives." Mrs. Chen smiled proudly. "Michael has been developing ideas for his capstone project, something about integrating traditional auto repair with sustainable transportation services." The conversation that followed was one of those rare moments when Marcus felt like he was witnessing the future taking shape in real time. Diana's institutional resources, Michael's fresh perspective, Mrs. Chen's community wisdom, and his own hard-earned experience started weaving together into something that felt both practical and visionary. "The thing is," Marcus said, warming to the subject, "people in this neighborhood don't just need transportation. They need reliable, affordable transportation that fits their actual lives. A single mother working 2 jobs doesn't have time for complicated bike share apps or unpredictable shuttle schedules. But an electric bike she can check out here, where she already brings her car for service, where she knows and trusts the people. That might work." Diana nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly the kind of insight we need. The community trust element is crucial. People have to believe the program will actually be there for them when they need it. And maintained properly, Michael added. No point having electric bikes if they're always broken or the batteries don't charge. Mrs. Chen looked thoughtful. In the community gardens, we learned that programs work best when local people are involved in running them, not just using them, but helping decide how they work. Marcus felt something click into place. What if we structured it so that the community has real input into how the program develops? Not just feedback after decisions are made, but actual participation in shaping the services. Diana pulled out her phone, apparently making notes. I love this. What would that look like practically? Regular community meetings here at the shop, Marcus suggested. Monthly check-ins where users can report problems, suggest improvements, maybe even vote on new features or routes. Make it feel like something the neighborhood owns, not something imposed from outside. The morning stretched into afternoon as they refined ideas, sketched possibilities, and outlined next steps. Michael proved to have an intuitive grasp of system design that impressed Diana and reminded Marcus why he'd been so eager to mentor the young man. Mrs. Chen contributed insights about community dynamics that only came from decades of neighborhood involvement. By the time Diana left with a folder full of notes and commitments for follow-up meetings, Marcus felt energized in a way he hadn't experienced since the early days of opening the shop. This wasn't just about expanding his business or even serving his community better. This was about creating something genuinely new, something that proved small-scale, locally owned enterprises could be at the forefront of innovation instead of being bypassed by it. Michael stayed behind as his grandmother ran errands, eager to explore the new diagnostic equipment and discuss his plans for college. As Marcus showed him how to read the complex data streams from a modern hybrid vehicle, he realized how much their relationship had evolved. What had started as informal mentoring had become something closer to collaboration. Marcus, Michael said suddenly, looking up from the diagnostic screen, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Why did you choose to stay here? All these years, with the struggles and the bills and the big chains moving in. You could have sold out, taken a job with one of the dealerships, maybe moved somewhere. Easier. Marcus considered the question seriously. It was something he'd been asked before by well-meaning friends and frustrated creditors, but coming from Michael, it felt different, more important somehow. You know what I learned from Mr. Ramirez, the man who taught me this trade? Marcus said finally. He told me that every neighborhood needs someone who knows how to fix things, not just cars, but the connections between people. The trust that makes a community work. He gestured around the garage, taking in the organized chaos, the evidence of decades of work and relationships. This place isn't just about fixing cars, Michael. It's about being a constant in people's lives. When Mrs. Chen's husband died, she knew she could still bring her car here and someone would take care of it fairly. When that teenage girl was saving up for her first car, she knew I'd help her find something reliable and teach her basic maintenance. When the veteran came back from deployment with PTSD, he knew he could sit here and work on his truck without anyone judging him. Michael nodded slowly. So, staying was about more than just the business. Staying was about being part of something bigger than myself, about proving that you don't have to choose between taking care of people and making a living. Marcus smiled. Though I'll admit, some months it felt like a pretty expensive principle to maintain. And now, with the partnership program and the city initiative, Marcus looked at the new equipment, the expanded office space, the charging station visible through the window. Now I get to do what I've always done, just with better tools and more ways to help people. And maybe most importantly, I get to train people like you to carry it forward. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed Elena's name. "Elena," he answered. "Good timing. How are things in the corporate world?" "Complicated as always, but good complicated." Her voice came through clearly, despite the obvious background noise of a busy office. "Listen, I'm calling because I wanted to run something by you. We've been watching how the independent partner network has developed over the past 6 months, and the results are beyond what anyone expected." Marcus put the phone on speaker so Michael could hear. "In what way?" "Customer satisfaction rates among network shops are consistently higher than both dealerships and chain operations. Revenue growth has been steady but sustainable. Most importantly, we're seeing genuine innovation coming from the network partners, solutions to problems our corporate R&D teams never even identified." Elena paused, and Marcus could hear papers rustling. "Your shop specifically has become a model for community integration that we want to replicate. The way you've combined traditional auto service with emerging transportation options, the community engagement, the mentorship program, it's exactly what we hoped the network could accomplish." Michael leaned closer to the phone, his excitement evident. "Ms. Walsh, this is Michael Chen. I'm one of Marcus's apprentices. I wanted to thank you for creating a program that keeps places like this alive. Michael, I've heard about you from Marcus. Congratulations on your scholarship." Elena's voice warmed noticeably. "And thank you for recognizing what we're trying to do. Young people like you are exactly why this program matters." Marcus felt a surge of pride, both in Michael and in what they'd all built together. "Elena, Diana Torres was here today talking about a municipal sustainability program. It sounds like there might be opportunities for other network partners to get involved in similar initiatives." "That's actually why I'm calling. We're launching what we're calling the Community Innovation Grant Program. Basically, we're funding pilot projects initiated by network partners that demonstrate new models for local transportation services. Your work with the city would be a perfect candidate." Michael stepped forward, his teenage enthusiasm overriding his normal politeness. "Ms. Walsh, could I ask you something? I'm starting college next semester, studying automotive technology and sustainable transportation. Do you think there might be opportunities for students like me to contribute to what you're building?" Elena was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could almost hear her mind working. "Michael, how would you feel about being part of something unprecedented? A fellowship program where students work directly with network partners on real-world transportation challenges, learning not just the technical skills, but the community engagement side of the business." Marcus watched Michael's face light up and felt something profound settle into place. This wasn't just about saving his garage or even building a successful partnership. This was about creating pathways for the next generation, about proving that community-based businesses could be laboratories for innovation, not just repositories for tradition. "I'd love that," Michael said simply. "Then let's make it happen. Marcus, I'm going to be in town next week for a network partner meeting. Why don't we sit down with Michael and Diana Torres and see what we can build together?" After they ended the call, Marcus and Michael stood in comfortable silence for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what had just been discussed. Through the window, Mrs. Chen could be seen returning from her errands, moving with the careful grace that had carried her through decades of hard work and community involvement. "Marcus," Michael said quietly, "thank you for everything, for teaching me about cars, but also about what it means to be part of a community." Marcus felt a tightness in his throat that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "Michael, you've given me something too. You've reminded me that all of this," he gestured around the garage, "has to be about the future, not just the past. About growing and changing while keeping what matters most." Mrs. Chen entered the garage with a small bag of groceries and her usual observant smile. "You two look very serious. Good serious or worried serious?" "Good serious, Grandma," Michael replied, then launched into an excited explanation of the conversation with Elena and the potential fellowship program. As Marcus listened to Michael's enthusiastic recounting, watched Mrs. Chen's proud smile, and thought about Diana's visit and Elena's call, he realized something profound had happened. The garage that had once felt like a last stand against inevitable change had become a launching pad for innovation. The values that had seemed outdated in a corporate world had proven to be exactly what was needed for the future. The storm that had brought Elena Walsh into his life 6 months ago had indeed changed everything, but not in the dramatic overnight way that storms usually did. Instead, it had initiated a gradual transformation that felt organic and sustainable, like a seed that needed both rain and time to grow into something strong. Marcus looked around his garage one more time, seeing it with fresh eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new customers who needed more than just their cars fixed. But tonight, as the autumn sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor and Mrs. Chen's Honda hummed quietly on the lift, Marcus Rivera knew he was exactly where he belonged. In the morning, he'd start planning the community meeting Diana had suggested. He'd begin outlining ideas for Elena's grant program. He'd continue working with Michael on the diagnostic systems that would serve as the foundation for his college studies. But right now, he was content to savor this moment of completion and anticipation, knowing that the best storms were the ones that cleared the air and made space for new growth. And in the heart of one small garage in an overlooked neighborhood, something extraordinary was taking root. 2 years had woven together like threads in a tapestry, each day adding another strand to the pattern that had emerged from one stormy night's chance encounter. Marcus stood at the entrance of what had once been simply Rivera's auto repair, watching the morning bustle of what had become something unprecedented, a living demonstration that the future of transportation could be both high-tech and deeply human. The garage itself remained recognizably the same at its core, but it had grown organically into something that defied easy categorization. The original repair bays still hummed with the familiar sounds of wrench turning and engines purring, but now they shared space with electric vehicle charging stations, a gleaming row of community bikes, and a small fleet of autonomous delivery pods that served the neighborhood's elderly residents. Elena arrived precisely at 9, as she had every Tuesday for the past 6 months, during the pilot program's most intensive phase. She emerged from her Tesla with an armload of tablets and the kind of energetic stride that Marcus had learned. Meant good news from the corporate world. "Morning, Marcus," she called, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. "Ready to make history?" "No, thought we already did that," Marcus replied with a grin, wiping his hands on a work rag that had somehow remained unchanged despite everything else transforming around it. Elena laughed. "Today's different. Today we find out if the board approves nationwide expansion of the Community Innovation Network." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. What had started as a single partnership between a struggling garage and a tech company had evolved into something neither of them had imagined possible. The independent partner network now included over 300 shops across the country, each one serving as a node in a larger ecosystem of community-centered transportation solutions. Michael Chen rounded the corner from the college transport lab, now a permanent fixture adjacent to the garage. At 19, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had found his calling early, the gangly teenager who had once helped. His grandmother, with car troubles, had become the lead student researcher on the Community Mobility Project, his work catching the attention of urban planners and sustainability experts nationwide. "Marcus, Elena," He nodded to both, his tone professional but warm. The morning data just came in from the sensor network. You're going to love this. He led them to the expanded office area, where wall-mounted screens displayed real-time information about neighborhood transportation patterns. Colorful lines tracked the movement of shared bikes, community vehicles, and even pedestrian traffic through the streets surrounding the garage. Look at this. Michael pointed to a graph showing transportation mode usage over the past year. Car ownership in the neighborhood has dropped by 35%, but mobility has actually increased. People are making more trips, accessing more services, connecting more with their community. Elena studied the data with the intensity that had made her a successful CEO. And the satisfaction metrics? Highest we've recorded. But here's the really interesting part. Michael switched to another screen. The economic impact isn't just about reduced transportation costs for residents. Local businesses are seeing increased foot traffic. Property values have stabilized after years of decline, and we're measuring actual improvements in air quality. Marcus shook his head in wonder. Mrs. Chen always said a good neighborhood is like a good engine. Every part has to work with every other part. Speaking of Mrs. Chen, Eleanor smiled, I have something for you both. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a formal-looking document. The board didn't just approve nationwide expansion, they approved something else, something I've been working on for months. She handed the document to Marcus. As he read, his expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. This is, he started, then stopped, rereading to make sure he understood correctly. A community ownership agreement, Elena finished. The garage, the equipment, the technology, even a substantial portion of the intellectual property we've developed together, it's all being transferred to a community trust. You'll maintain operational control, but the community will have a permanent stake in how it develops. Michael leaned over Marcus's shoulder, reading rapidly. This means the neighborhood actually owns part of the transportation system. The residents have voting rights on major decisions. Elena nodded. It means that what we've built here can't be bought out, can't be sold to a chain, can't be sacrificed for short-term profits. It belongs to the people it serves. Marcus set down the document carefully, his hands not quite steady. Elena, I don't understand. This must be worth millions. Why would your company give up ownership? Because we learned something from you that no business school teaches, Elena replied. The most valuable assets aren't always the ones you own. Sometimes they're the ones you help create and then trust others to steward. The garage door chimed, and Mrs. Chen entered with her characteristic purposeful stride. Now in her 80s, she had become the unofficial grandmother of the community transport program, her practical wisdom helping shape policies that worked for real people rather than theoretical users. Good morning, everyone, she said. Then noticed the formal atmosphere. I hope I'm not interrupting something important. Actually, your timing is perfect, Elena said. Mrs. Chen, how would you feel about becoming the first community liaison for the Transportation Trust? Mrs. Chen looked puzzled. What does that mean exactly? Marcus, still processing the magnitude of what was happening, laughed with genuine joy. It means you get to boss all of us around officially, instead of just doing it informally. Marcus Rivera, Mrs. Chen said with mock sternness, I have never bossed anyone. She paused, then smiled. I have merely provided guidance when it was needed. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their laughter. Through the windows, they could see a small convoy arriving. Several cars bearing government plates, a news van, and Elena's corporate vehicle. The delegation from Washington, Marcus asked. Elena nodded. Congressional Committee on Rural and Urban Transportation Innovation. They want to see if what we've built here can be replicated as national policy. As the representatives filed out of their vehicles, Marcus felt a familiar mix of pride and anxiety. Politicians and bureaucrats didn't always understand the nuances of community-based solutions. There was a risk that in trying to scale up, they might miss what made the program work in the first place. Congresswoman Patricia Hamilton led the group, a woman in her 50s with the kind of weathered pragmatism that suggested she'd seen plenty of pilot programs come and go. She approached Marcus with an extended hand and a direct gaze. "Mr. Rivera, I've read the reports, but I wanted to see for myself what you've accomplished here." Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip and calloused palms that suggested she understood work of the hands-on variety. "Welcome to Rivera's, Congresswoman, though I should probably say what we've accomplished. This wasn't a one-person effort." "No," she agreed, looking around at the organized bustle of the garage, the charging stations, the bike share setup, the lab addition. "I can see that. Walk me through how it actually works. Not the technical specifications. I can read those, how it works for people." Over the next hour, Marcus, Elena, Michael, and Mrs. Chen led the delegation through a demonstration that felt more like a neighborhood tour than a formal presentation. They watched residents checking out electric bikes for errands, saw elderly neighbors using the delivery pod system to receive groceries, observed students from the community college working alongside experienced mechanics on hybrid vehicles. But what seemed to impress the Congresswoman most was the relationships, the way the bike share users knew each other by name, the way problems got solved through conversation rather than complaint systems, the way innovation emerged from daily interactions rather than formal research protocols. "This is remarkable," she said finally, standing in the center of the garage as the delegation prepared to leave. "But I have to ask the hard question. Can this scale? Can you replicate the human elements that make it work when you're dealing with hundreds of communities instead of one?" And Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. They'd been wrestling with this question themselves. "Congresswoman," Elena said, "we've learned that you can't replicate community, but you can create conditions where community can emerge. The technology, the training, the support systems, those can be standardized. The relationships, the trust, the specific solutions each neighborhood develops, those have to grow organically." Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "May I say something?" The Congresswoman nodded respectfully. "I have lived in this neighborhood for 50 years. I have seen programs come and go, promises made and broken. The difference here is not the technology, though the technology is very good. The difference is that the people who designed this program live with the consequences of how it works. Their children use these bikes. Their neighbors depend on these services. Their own cars get fixed in this garage." She gestured around the space with quiet authority. "You cannot govern a community from a distance, but you can support people who are part of the community to govern themselves." The Congresswoman was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Mrs. Chen, that might be the wisest thing I've heard about transportation policy in my entire career." Drain, as the official delegation departed, promising follow-up meetings and policy discussions, a different kind of energy settled over the garage. The afternoon brought the usual mix of customers and community members, but with an undercurrent of celebration that Marcus couldn't quite name. Elena stayed longer than usual, helping Michael analyze data, chatting with Mrs. Chen about the trust agreement, simply being present in the space that had become so much more than either of them had. Imagine that stormy night 2 years ago. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the garage's windows, Marcus found himself standing with Elena in the same spot where they'd first talked about Mrs. Chen, about values and purpose, about what it meant to build something that mattered. Do you ever think about that night? Elena asked quietly. How different everything would be if your car hadn't broken down here. Marcus considered this. I think about it sometimes. But you know what I think more about? All the things that had to happen before that night to make it possible. All the customers who taught me that cars are just an excuse for building relationships. All the times I failed and learned from it. All the decisions to stay here when it would have been easier to leave. He paused, watching Mrs. Chen teach a group of teenagers how to properly check tire pressure, Michael explaining electric motor principles to a curious neighbor. A dozen small interactions that represented the daily miracle of community in action. I think that storm didn't create anything new, Marcus continued. It just washed away what was covering up what was already here. The possibility, the connections, the willingness of people to care about something bigger than themselves. Eleanor smiled, pulling out her phone to take a picture of the scene. Not for social media or corporate reports, but simply to remember this moment. You know what the final item on the trust agreement says? Marcus shook his head. That this garage will remain a place where anyone can get help, regardless of their ability to pay. Where innovation serves community, not the other way around. Where success is measured not just in profit, but in the number of people whose lives are made better. She tucked the phone away. It's your philosophy, Marcus, made legally binding and permanent. As the last customer of the day drove away, as Michael finished updating the community bulletin board, as Mrs. Chen carefully locked her bike in the secure storage area the neighborhood had voted to install, Marcus felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with business metrics or policy achievements. They had proved something important here. That technology and tradition could coexist and strengthen each other. That community ownership could be more efficient than corporate control. That caring about people's lives could be good business, as well as good ethics. The storm that had brought Elena to his garage had passed long ago. But its effects continued to ripple outward, creating new possibilities, new connections, new communities inspired by the idea that transportation could be about more than just getting from point A to point B. As Marcus locked up the garage for the night, he paused to look at the bulletin board one more time. Among all the thank you notes and photos, in the very center was a simple handwritten card that read, "Thank you for proving that small acts of kindness can change the world." It wasn't signed, but Marcus didn't need to know who had written it. It could have been from anyone whose life had been touched by what they'd built here. And that, he thought, was exactly the point. The lights went out, the garage settled into silence, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled with the promise of another storm, another chance for unexpected connections, another opportunity to prove that kindness, community, and innovation could transform not just individual lives, but the very fabric of how society moved forward together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.